Flourish Factor, hosted by Kennedy Blake.
Hello, welcome back to the Flourish Factor. I am Kennedy, your host. I don't know how often I'm going to introduce myself, but I figured for the first couple episodes, in case we have new listeners, I would just reintroduce myself. So thank you for listening. Before I get in to today's episode, I just wanted to give a shout out to my Instagram, the _flourish_factor, and my TikTok, which is the Flourish Factor podcast. I've been receiving a lot of love on my personal Instagram, kennedeymcclay, for content for the podcast. I actually just completed a photo shoot yesterday to have some new cover art for Spotify. So if you're listening on Spotify, you're seeing the brand new cover album, and I really like it. I thought it was really cute. It's the theme. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the vines that are in the cover photo. Something familiar that you guys will be like, oh, that's Kennedy's room. We're going to get right on into today's episode because I think I have a lot to cover. I originally did not want to kind of dive so deep and rapidly into some kind of serious conversation, but I feel like in order to get to know me better as a person and my perspective on life, it would be good to know kind of my background, who I am, what's happened to me in my life, and furthermore would just, validate my opinions and my advice, I guess you would say. And then you'll just get to know me a little bit better, and maybe you can relate to some of the things that I've experienced. We can all just trauma bond together. I am going to be talking about mental health, so if anxiety is like a triggering subject for you, I'm going to kind of graze over some of the more serious things and leave those for their own topics for videos, but I am going to be talking just a lot about different issues with mental health. So if that is something that is relevant to you and you're not ready to sit down and listen to a whole episode on it, feel free to stop listening, click off, or wait for next week's episode. That's totally fine. I completely understand. Or if maybe you feel like you're the only one going through something like this and you'd like to hear someone else's perspective and maybe not feel alone, then I think this would be a great episode for you to listen to. With that being said, let's get into this episode. Living with anxiety. Growing up, I have always had very anxious tendencies from a very young age. I was an only child up until I was about 11 years old, and then I had a half-sister. But prior to that, I was an only child. I had two parents in a suburban living household. I went to Catholic school. That was kind of my upbringing for elementary school. I think that there is a genetic connection to mental health in both sides of my family. I'm not going to go into the specifics on those individuals or people like that, but just from my own perspective and experiences in life, I think that I definitely get some of those tendencies from other family members, and it just kind of expanded and was built upon the experiences that I had growing up. At a very, very young age, I had a giant imagination. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house growing up because my parents both worked in the office. From the time I was a baby up until I was about probably 8 or 9, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents on the weekends, in the summer, and on the days before I was going to full-time elementary school. I would spend the mornings and the afternoons with my grandparents, and they always had me doing all of these fun activities. We had a very set routine. When I got there, I knew exactly what was going to be going on. I knew what time we were going to eat breakfast. I knew my playing time. I knew my learning time. I knew my afternoon nap time. I loved to make little videos with my grandfather's old tape recorder, and I would just play music on their radio and go through the CDs and pick out a soundtrack from a movie that I really liked or an album from an artist that I really liked, and I would just dance around their living room. They had a bunch of stuffed animals, and I genuinely made friendships with these stuffed animals. Like, I just had such a wild imagination, and my grandfather played a big role in that. He loved to make voices for these characters, and he really just engraved his life as my grandfather. Oh my God, I'm getting emotional. He passed away a few years ago, so sometimes thinking of those memories makes me like happy sad. But he just fully engrossed himself in entertaining me and being my best friend. And that was really a great experience growing up as an only child, to have someone who was kind of that like playful figure in my life. Not to say that my parents weren't like playful. I spent a lot of time with my mom as well when she was working part-time, and she would play all the games and do Barbies and dress up and tea parties and baking and things like that. But my grandparents is where I spent a lot of time just being very creative and writing and drawing. And my Grammy was a teacher, so she was a retired teacher, so she loved to just help me learn puzzles and do math problems and read. I did a lot of reading, and it was a lot of fun. With that being said, I was very comfortable, I guess, being alone. I enjoyed entertaining myself, and I think that was huge for my family, was to make sure that I was independent and comfortable entertaining myself because I was an only child, and they just wanted to make sure that I was always happy and that I was always keeping myself occupied, especially when the adults were off doing other things like work or cleaning. At the age of 2, I was enrolled in a dance studio, and I loved dancing. As I said, I would dance around in my grandparents' living room, but this dance studio was not your typical dance studio. It was owned by this woman who used to have her own real studio, but now she was kind of working out of this community center and just doing like little dance classes once a week, and then we would have a recital at the end of the year. And I loved that class. It was only once every Thursday, and I had one really close friend in there at a young age named Maddie, and she was my old next door neighbor, and she and I clicked from the time we started hanging out. When we were in elementary school, we would play together all of the time. We had this fence in between our houses. Like, my backyard met her front yard, and we had the fence in between. And she and I would yell across the yards and be like, "Can you play today?" And she would always jump over the fence. I would always jump over the fence. She was definitely like my equivalent to a sister, I think, growing up, because I didn't have any siblings, and we also just had that extra connection with dance. So we would always put on these performances. Everyone always jokes about it on social media, like, oh, when you wanted to have a sleepover, like you and your friends or you and your cousins would like come up with a dance routine to perform for your parents, and then be like, so we just put this whole choreographed vision together, so you're gonna let us have a sleepover, right? So me and Maddie were definitely those girls. Like, we did that probably once a week. We were fully dedicated. I am very grateful that I had that friendship with her, because I really needed someone like-minded, someone my age, who I could have familiarity with, I could have commonality with. We liked the same TV shows, we listened to the same music, and I thought that her life was so interesting because she went to public school and I went to private school. So her life just seemed so different than mine. I felt like she had a lot more exposure to the real world than I did, and I didn't think of it like that when I was little, but looking back now, I understand that that is kind of the understanding I was receiving as a little kid was like, she goes to public school, like I can only imagine what's different there. And I think that the private school I went to just really sheltered me from the real world. And I'm not putting down a religion. I'm not putting down any individual who went to the school that I went to. I still have friends from that elementary school, and I have a lot of family friends that still participate at that church, and I loved it. I thought it was a great school. It was a really close-knit community, but something about private school just really isolates you from the rest of the world, especially as an only child who her only extracurricular was going to dance once a week. Like, I didn't have the exposure to a lot of social interaction, I guess, than you would in public school, where you're dealing with a ton of different kids from a lot of different backgrounds. Another thing to mention about my friend Maddie was whenever she would leave my house, because she would spend the night at my house a lot, and when she would leave, I would get so upset. Not at her, but just like I would be sad that sense of community and social life was leaving. And you know, my mom would always remind me, like, she has family at home, like she has her own siblings, she has her own room, she has her own friends. And it's not to say I didn't go to her house, but it was definitely like I felt more comfortable in my home and she didn't mind coming to my house. So I just remember kind of that dependency on having a friend like that. I would just always get very upset if she couldn't hang out or if she was sick and had to go home and things like that. And my mom would always say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like, you need to branch out and find friends at school and maybe talk to more girls at dance class. Like, find other people that you really like. Everybody at private school is more cookie cutter, you know? So not to say I didn't make friends in Catholic school that I played with during recess and during like just time sitting at our desk. We would always talk. I would always get in trouble when I was in like first and second grade for talking. I loved to talk to my friends. I could never shut up. If something happened at recess, I'm like, well, I can't just go back to class. Like, I need to sit in class and talk about recess. But I do remember, even from an elementary level age, I just had this weight of anxiety just like in my chest. I felt very like small compared to everyone else. I never had a big friend group. I would always just find friends from different groups that I connected with, but I was never in a group, and that made me feel kind of isolated because it would be like, oh, I'm friends with this girl, but she's friends with her, and that girl doesn't like me, or that girl thinks I'm weird. And so I didn't really talk to the whole group. Wait till that person was alone or the other person was sick, so like they had no other excuse to talk to me or to not talk to me. Anytime we had to play a game at gym or at recess, sometimes our teachers would make us do like a group kickball game or something like that. I absolutely hated it. I was petrified to play. I think part of it, looking back now, was that I didn't know the rules of the game and no one bothered to explain them. We would just kind of go out there and play, and they expected us to already know what we were doing. And that gave me a lot of anxiety because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel very uncomfortable. People are like, you know, yelling at you to go to the next base. And if you kick the ball, like, you need to run. And like, those things to me were just very overwhelming. And like, looking back, it's like Kennedy, it was a game of kickball. But you have to think at like 6 years old, like people yelling at you and the pressure and the unknown, like that, it was just very scary for me. Yeah, so so that was one thing that I remember. Another thing was public speaking. So like I said, I was a dancer growing up, so I loved being on stage. I loved performing. I never had stage fright. That was not like one of my not weaknesses, but that just wasn't something that ever was an issue for me. But when it came to giving presentations in class or having to have a serious talk with an adult, I would just get very tense and very anxious. And a lot of the times I couldn't even get my thoughts out, or I would just get like very shaky. And it was very difficult for me. And then I turned 7. And when I was 7, my parents sat me down and told me that my dad was moving out. And I'm going to be honest, at the time, I wasn't really that shocked. I don't know what it appeared like to them, but I remember sitting in their bedroom when they told me the news, and my dad was crying. My mom was just kind of sitting there, trying to explain to me in an appropriate manner, like what was going on. And I was kind of just like, okay, like if that's what's going to make you guys happy, like you're my parents, I want you to be happy too. It's not all about me. And I was just very accepting of it. And I think that also just came from the experiences I had in the house. My parents argued a lot, and they tried to hide it from me the best that they could. I know that they would try not to yell. They would just have conversations when I would go upstairs. But, you know, things happen. People get upset, and like voices were raised and things of that nature. So I definitely lived through those negative experiences. And when they told me the news that they were getting divorced, I was kind of like, thank God, because I'm sick of hearing you guys fight. It just wasn't a great environment for a little kid, especially somebody who didn't have a sibling to go to or to console with. And my best friend, Maddie, I did talk to her about it. I remember sitting her down and like breaking the news to her that my parents were getting divorced. And she was very upset too, because we did spend a lot of time together. But that was just a difficult time. I don't know. But that was definitely a pivotal moment in my childhood, was obviously my parents splitting. So my mom actually, additional to dance, enrolled me in cheerleading. And cheerleading was a time where I grew in my anxiety. It was a lot more hardcore than my dance class was. The coaches were a little more tense. The season was shorter, so we had to learn the cheers a lot quicker. We had to learn the routines quicker. Stunts were very serious, because if somebody falls, like, that's dangerous. So it was very intense for a young age. And you know, I started off on the Pee-wee squad. Like, I was 6, 7 years old when I started cheer, and we would go cheer at all the football games and get dressed up. And one of my friends from elementary school, Olivia, actually was on the cheer team too. So I really bonded with her, and that's when she and I kind of got closer, was because of cheer. And we would like ride to the games together, and our parents would always like say hi and take pictures of us and things like that. But again, like dependency, she was one of those people that I absolutely adored as a friend, and she also lived in my neighborhood. Like I said, my school was very like close knit, and like the community was very small, and everybody kind of lived in the same area and did the same things. So my friend group was very, very tight, because they were everywhere. They were at my dance. They were in my school. They were in my neighborhood. Like, I didn't really branch out that much. And there's only so much you can do as a child, because you don't have your driver's license. You don't have a car. Like, you can't just like drive an hour away to see another friend, you know? Like, you got what you got. And then those were the people that you befriended. But once my parents got divorced, things got a little rocky. I started having a lot of nightmares. I was having some issues when I would go to bed at night, because I was used to my dad always coming in my room and saying goodnight to me. We had just like our little routine. He had this song that he used to sing me from when I was a baby, and he would always sing it to me right before bed. And when he moved out, that was like, I remember being something kind of weird, was that I didn't see him every night, and I would get very upset. And my mom had gotten me like some stuffed animal, and I kind of associated one with her and one with him, and I would always lay them in my bed so that I hope I don't get emotional. I'm really trying not to. So that when I would go to sleep at night, if I was at one parent's house versus the other, I would have that stuffed animal to kind of resemble the other person. And they didn't know that I was associating the stuffed animals with them, but in my head, that's just like how I thought about it. But I started getting a lot of nightmares. I started waking up in the middle of the night and sleepwalking and sleep talking and crying and screaming and having night terrors. And my mom was just kind of like, she's obviously going through some mental shift. And then I guess I was expressing to her some of the more irrational fears. I'm putting quotation marks around that because I don't know if I would necessarily call them irrational now, knowing that it was diagnosed as anxiety, but they definitely were categorized like as irrational fears that I had from age 7. I was very, very, very scared that the world was going to just end. And I was scared that like a meteor was going to hit and we were all going to die. I was scared something was going to happen to one of my parents when I wasn't with them. I was very worried when I would go to my dad's and my mom would be alone, because as a child, you don't really associate your parent as like a normal human being. You just think of them as mom and dad. So whenever I would leave my mom, I was like, what is she gonna do? Like, I'm not there. Like, what does she do with her life when I'm not around? And she was probably like, thank God I can take a shower. I can, have the weekend to myself. I can paint my nails, whatever she did. But at a young age, it was very much like, oh my God, like I'm leaving my mom. And I would always call her and I would be crying and wanting to come home, and it was just kind of all over the place. So my parents decided to put me in therapy because of the divorce and also because of these kind of irrational fears that I was expressing and the night terrors. And I went to this therapist, and I actually still go to this same office. I love the workers there and the establishment. Everyone's just very kind and very welcoming and very understanding, as therapists should be. But I had this one therapist, and I worked with her for about like 2 years, I think, before she ended up breaking news to me that she was moving to California and I would have to find a new therapist. And I literally like sobbed in her arms. I was like, there's no way, like, you can't leave me. Like I've made so much progress. Like you can't leave me. But I would go into these therapy sessions, and she would always just have board games. Like, it was very elementary, I guess. It wasn't like a sit down serious conversation. They made it that way so that, they could get information out of little kids that maybe asking them directly, you wouldn't get the real answers. So we would just play games, and she would casually ask me, like, what's it like living with dad? How's life with mom? Like, what's school like? Do you have friends? What's your favorite subject in school? Like, what are your grades looking like? Blah, blah, blah. Like, things like that. And some of those irrational fears, I remember she acknowledged them, but at the time, I don't remember anyone actually being like, we think she has anxiety. It was just more like she's probably just out of sorts with coping with the divorce, and it's a big shift for a young child to have to deal with going back and forth between houses and seeing their parents not as a couple. So I think that was kind of the angle that she had. But as time went on, more things were happening in my life. My dad had kind of moved in and out. It was like he was in the house, and then my mom moved out, and then he moved in with his parents, and my mom moved to this townhouse in a different neighborhood so I could go to the same school. And then he moved back in the house, and then my mom was still in the townhouse, but then he had met this woman and was seeing her, and I didn't know about her. And then when he finally introduced me to this woman, aka now my stepmother, it was kind of like, oh, surprise, we're actually moving in with her and you're gonna have to switch schools. It kind of threw me for a loop. I didn't know that when he introduced me to this woman that meant it was really serious and that things would be changing. So in 6th grade, I ended up having to switch schools, and my mom ended up moving somewhere closer to my new school because my dad had moved, and she was trying to kind of accommodate their living situation and make it so that I didn't live an hour away from my dad. So we moved a little further north. I went to a new school, and that was very scary for me. I was really upset to leave my old neighborhood with all of my friends. My friend Maddie, I was devastated to move. I was like, what am I going to do without my best friend? It was just a lot. My stepmom did have 2 sons at the time. One was in his 20s and the other one was 6 when I met him, and I was 10. So we moved into her townhouse when I was 10 years old, and I lived with this younger stepbrother. And the dynamic was just very odd. I remember just being like, what is happening? Like, who is this kid? Like, he's now my brother. Like, it was just a very odd situation to be put in, and there wasn't really much communication from that side of the family of like, how are you doing? How are you adjusting? It was more of just like, you have to adjust because this is the way life is now, and the adult, you're the child, so like, this is what it is. In therapy, I was obviously having different conversations with my new therapist and kind of telling her about everything that was going on and why I was so overwhelmed and so stressed and going to a new school and not having any friends. And I went to another Catholic school, which I thought was going to be good. And it was kind of 50-50. I would say the first year I was there, things were pretty rough, just in my home life and also with my friends and social life at school. There was this girl, I'm not going to name names, but yeah. So there was this girl who had also just started going to the school that same year, and I transferred 3 months into the year, so she had already been there for 3 months. And she had spread this rumor when I got there that I was really stuck up and I was rich and I came from this academy because my old school was this name. It was blank blank academy. And I was like, okay, but it wasn't an actual academy. That was just the name of the school because it was a Catholic academia place and they just called it an academy, but we literally had like 150 students tops, like out of all from K to 8. Like elementary school to 8th grade, we had like 150, maybe 200 students. So it was definitely like a very small place. But yeah, this girl had spread this rumor to the entire grade at this new school that I was some spoiled brat who came from this really rich preppy school. And I don't know how she came up with that because I had never even spoken to her. So I don't know how she knew where I came from. She must have Googled me. Like, I don't know. But she didn't like me right off the bat. And I thought that was really strange because I'd never experienced I hadn't experienced real bullying growing up. I had like little things here and there with some boys in like 2nd grade. Like this one kid made fun of me for having glasses. Another kid made fun of me for having allergies, like things like that. But it was never anything serious or like spiteful. But this was the first time where I was like, dang, like this girl actually hates me. Like I don't know what I did to her. And just simply existing was a problem for her, which I think is really weird. Like, I think that's very common, even as an adult now, is that you learn that some people just simply don't like you. They don't vibe with you for whatever reason. It's not you, it's them. And that's very much true. Like, some people just genuinely hate to hate or they think you have something that they don't have, that they wish they had, and they'll just start making up shit, making up rumors about you, and trying to put you in a negative light so that they can feel better about themselves. And I think that's really sad. I still know people like that as an adult, but definitely at the age of 11, it was a little jarring to know that somebody was that passionate about making a negative light out of somebody that they had never even met before. So I went to this new school, and I remember I got there and they told me in the cafeteria that there was an allergy table. And I have a lot of allergies. I am allergic to eggs, nuts, shellfish, wheat, gluten, soy, bananas, pineapple, raw celery, raw carrots, raw apple, and I don't know if I'm missing anything. I think I covered the top ones. Seaweed, codfish. I think those are, I probably missed some, but those are the basis of my allergies. And they had this like designated allergy table, and I was like, I don't want to sit there. Like, that's going to exclude me and make me even more isolated than I already feel. I sat at a normal table, but I was definitely very paranoid that I was going to have some kind of negative experience with somebody who was eating a sandwich with peanut butter or had a deviled egg or something like that in their lunchbox. And I think that stemmed from me at a very young age, always having people try to tell me I could eat things that I knew I couldn't. And I would get in verbal arguments with adults at like the age of 4 because they'd be like, you can eat this birthday cake. Like, it's somebody's birthday and we brought cupcakes in for the class. And I'd be like, I cannot eat that. Like, I am allergic to eggs. Like, you cannot give me that. I will literally die. And they would like try to force feed me it, not physically like shove it in my mouth, but they'd be like, no, honey, like they would give me one. And I'd be like, I can't even touch it. Like, get the fuck away from me. And my mom had some choice words with some of the teachers there because of that. But I think that those core memories kind of, you know, flooded into later in life. So in this middle school, I was just very scared about my allergies, and I was like, all these people, they don't know me. Like, I'm going to have to reintroduce myself. I'm going to have to go through the whole system again. It was just very weird. I feel like when you pick up and you move and you meet a new community, you have the opportunity to A, reinvent yourself, or B, face the reality that is your life, and then you have to kind of establish that when you meet someone, kind of like I am on this podcast, I guess. Like, I am going through my past so that you can understand who I am now. And I think it's the same way with friendships. You kind of have to have those deep talks and really get to know the person's background, or else you're only going to have surface level friends. Like, if you don't have a deeper understanding, I don't think that you can really make a serious connection with a friend. And to this day, I still have problems with that. And I'm going to go into a whole separate episode on friendship, because I have had some really rough experiences with friends that have led me to have very far and few in between friendships as an almost 22-year-old. There were multiple girls that obviously followed along with it. I don't even know what the boys thought. I doubt they remembered it after 2 days, but you know, it's middle school, so everybody likes to gossip. Everybody's starting to get crushes on people. Like, it's just the way of the world there. And I just really, really hated it. I was kind of introduced to this one friend group from the get-go. And I shadowed with this one girl who I'm actually still friends with today. And she was my shadow. So like, she introduced me to everybody and got me acclimated with the school. And she was in band. And so I sat with her at the lunch table and like went to recess. And she was friends with all the boys. So I met all the guys through her. And it was just an experience, to say the least. She's very outgoing. I love her. She just is full of energy, full of light. And I was like, how is she friends with all these people? Like, I couldn't fathom having more than 3 friends, and she had at least 20, like, in this grade. And I was shocked. I was like, I've never had a class this size before. There were like 65 of us, I think. I'm like, I've never had a class this size before. I've never had friend groups this large before, and a new school. It was just very, very overwhelming. I ended up meeting this group of girls who had similar interests to me. The one girl was in band, and I really liked her because I was also in band. So I would talk to her at band practice, I would talk to her after class, and that was good. And then she had some friends who were also in that same group. So I pretty much stayed to myself. I was known as the quiet, nice girl named Kennedy from another school. Literally, that's how people would describe me. The nice, quiet girl at school. And, you know, I feel like sometimes when people say you're nice, that's like almost a backhanded compliment. And I don't know if that's, maybe it's controversial. I don't know. That's just a hot take. I think that if you meet somebody and then they're like, oh my God, yeah, I know that girl. She's really nice and quiet. It's like, that's the depth that you know of me, is that I'm a nice person, then you don't know me. Like, I think that it is a very nice compliment to receive that you're a kind person or you're a caring person, because I do have a lot of empathy for people. But at the same time, if that's the only thing you have to describe me is that I'm nice and quiet, then like, I just don't think we're that close. But yeah, that was how everyone would describe me. Yeah, she's nice. Yeah, she's cool. Yeah, she's really quiet. She's to herself. And a lot of that was because I had so many things going on at home that I was just not in a good space to open up to people. But I did keep this one friendship from my dance studio, the old dance studio before I moved. And she and I got really close when I was in middle school. And we bonded over the band R5, and we just really clicked. And I think part of the reason why I stayed in the friendship for as long as I did is because I was holding on to this idea of my past life before moving and before my parents got divorced, and I was really just trying to hold on to whatever nostalgia I could. And once I finally was able to break away from that, I think that's when I saw a lot of growth in my life. But that is the story I'm going to go into in my friendship episode, because there is a lot of layers to that friendship and to that story. Something else that I wanted to mention real quick that I used to do from a young age and I still struggle with now is pulling my hair. Is the same thing as any other kind of like jittery thing. A lot of people, you know, pick their nails. Some people like shake their knee when they're anxious. A lot of people just have their thing, and mine has always been pulling my hair. And my mom would tell me when I was a baby that I would pull my hair, and that was a sign that I was tired. And so when I was growing up, my mom was like, oh, she just must be tired. And then when I was in school, my teachers would notice, and they'd be like, oh, maybe she's bored. Like, she's pulling her hair, she's bored. But then as I got older, I realized I did it when I was anxious. I did it when I was talking to someone that I wasn't comfortable with. I was doing it when I was sitting in class listening to a lecture and other things were going on in my head and I was stressed and overwhelmed, or we were doing a math problem that I didn't understand, and I would just pull and pull and pull my hair. So that was something that I addressed when I was in middle school to my therapist. Was I pull my hair all the time, and I was pulling out my hair. Like, it's not just I'm pulling a strand every once in a while. It's like I'm pulling it and it's breaking off. Like, you can see in my hair, obviously this is also because of bleach, but my hair has a lot of split ends, a lot of breakage, and a lot, like, you can see this really tiny piece up here. And a lot of that stems from me pulling my hair. I don't think I've ever acknowledged that before. Definitely not on social media. So, yeah, I pull my hair. I'm not like, oh yeah, I pull my hair. That's so cool of me. It's like, that's so quirky of me. But that is something that I don't think I've ever talked about, which is kind of funny. And it feels kind of good to just get it out there and let people know that is something that I deal with on a daily basis, is really trying to not pull my hair and finding coping mechanisms to not pull my hair. I was always afraid to raise my hand and participate in class. I kind of touched on that briefly with public speaking and being nervous, but I just had like this overwhelming anxiety, especially when I went to this new middle school, that I didn't want to say the wrong answer for the sake of disappointing a teacher or for the sake of getting made fun of for not knowing what I was talking about. I also struggled with testing anxiety, and I learned that in middle school as well. I would do really well on all of the homework, all of the in-class assignments, and then I would go to take the test and my mind would literally blank. And we tried different things. I remember I worked with like this one teacher and they were like, well, maybe if she just has longer time to take the exam, like she'll do better. And it was like, no, it wasn't time. Like I would sit there for an hour and do the same math test that somebody else would take in 30 minutes and I would still do just as bad. I just go into an exam. It could be any subject. I just want to point that out there. It's not just math. I suck at math. Like I take full responsibility. I made it to pre-calc and then after that I was checked out. But any other subject, you could ask me about my favorite band, you could ask me about my favorite movie series, and I would go in to take the paper exam or on the computer and I'd be like, yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, like what is a fruit? What is a banana? Like my mind just completely blanked and I thought it was the strangest thing. And I don't feel like testing anxiety is talked about enough or normalized in school. I feel like people assume that people use anxiety as a means to get away or an excuse from things, when in reality it's actually something just very overwhelming and very serious. And I don't think people see it that way, especially if you don't have anxiety or struggle with fear. Then it seems very out of touch for somebody to just be like, oh yeah, like I'm really struggling on that exam because my mind blanked because I have anxiety. And it's like, what do you mean? Like you just didn't study. And it's like, no, I literally studied for 6 hours and went in to take the test and my mind was just completely like zero blank. When I would do presentations in class, because we were forced to, I would get up there, and I remember in 7th grade, I did this presentation in my history class, and I had a lot of anxiety in history because it was a lot of memory retention and a lot of exams, and I did not do well in that class because I could not retain the information. I would just go in there and forget everything. And there was this guy in the class that I really liked at the time, and I remember I went up to do the presentation and I got really nervous, and it was timed. It had to be 10 minutes. Like it couldn't be over 10 minutes. It couldn't be under 10 minutes. Like it had to be exactly 10 minutes. And if you didn't make eye contact with the teacher right at 10 minutes, you were screwed. Like you would get points off your grade, which I thought was so dumb because we were 12 years old. And it was memorized, by the way. All we had was like a little note card. Everything had to be memorized and we had to do it 10 minutes on the dot. And I was so overwhelmed, so anxious by this presentation that my voice got really shaky and my face got red and my chest started getting blotchy. And when my voice gets shaky, I sound like I'm gonna cry. And I still do that now when I public speak at school, but I'm not crying. I'm just very anxious, so my voice just gets like a little muffled and a little shaky. And my anxiety just makes me get pink. And like, I don't know, like I can't help it. But I remember that specific day, I did this presentation, and this kid that I liked, he was like, he started laughing, and I was standing up there looking at my class, and I'm just seeing the guy that I really, really liked, and he's just laughing at me. And so then I sat down after my presentation and I started crying at my desk. And there was this girl that sat next to me. She was very nice. She got me a box of tissues, and then I got myself together. But yeah, and I still liked the boy after that. But he literally laughed at me because I was about to have a panic attack in front of the entire class. He did feel bad afterwards, though. I will say he was like, oh my God, are you okay? I didn't know you were actually going to cry. But besides the point, during middle school, because I was also having this huge life shift with my parents moving and my dad getting remarried, I was put into a new dance studio because I really missed dance and I had to move away from my old dance studio. This dance studio was the death of me. Like, I hated it with a passion. It was in Annapolis and it was competitive dance, and I had never done competitive dance before, but I made the team and I was like, this is taking the fun out of dance. Like, I would go to class scared, and I never experienced that before because growing up at this community center, my teacher was very patient. She was kind. If we didn't get a step, she would help us. Like, she wasn't screaming at us because we messed up or because we forgot a step. Like, she would actually just guide us through. But in competitive dance, things are different. It's a lot more intense. They want you to be like on your A game because when you go to a competition, you obviously are representing that team and that company and you want to do well. But I just think that for some reason, the woman who owned the studio was just very hardcore and gave me a lot of anxiety. So in 8th grade, we're flash forwarding a couple years. 8th grade, it was regionals. And with regionals, it's like you go to regionals, and if you score high enough, you get to go to nationals. And at this regionals competition, I was performing, and at the end of the dance, I remember just getting up, and we were doing like our walk off, like our exit, and I started dry heaving, like on the stage. Just dry heaving, like, like it was, just dry heaving was the most disgusting experience of my lifetime, and I don't wish that upon anyone. It's just as bad as throwing up, like just as bad, because you feel the exact same way and your body is making the same motion, but there's nothing happening. And that was the moment where I was like, yep, I hate performing on stage now because of this dance studio. They made me hate dance, and that was really hard because I love dance and they ruined it for me. And that's why when people are like, oh, did you used to dance? I was like, yeah, I danced for almost 13 years and then I quit. And they're like, well, why'd you quit? You could have danced through high school and college. I'm like, because I hated my dance studio and they made me afraid of dance. After that, after I dry heaved on stage, I ended up getting really sick and I got mono. And I was out of school for a couple weeks. I missed nationals because I had mono and I couldn't go. And they thought I was just not going. I just was finding an excuse not to go to the dance competition. And my mom was like, no, she's literally on steroids. Like, she can't go. That was a lot of drama. A lot of pressure for a kid. A lot of pressure for an almost 14-year-old. My entire experience as a child living with anxiety was honestly just the feeling of isolation and not knowing what the feelings were that I was going through. Like, you feel anxiety, you know when you're scared, you know when something's uncomfortable, but it doesn't always make sense. It's not always the rational thoughts. So it's like, this is really freaking me out, but I don't know why. I want to be friends with these people, but I can't speak up. I can't get my thoughts out. I can't contribute to a conversation. I really like this guy, but I'm scared to talk to him. I want to take this test and I want to ace the class, but when I go to take the exam, my mind blanks. I love to dance and I love to perform, but when my teacher's yelling at me and she's putting a lot of pressure on me, I go on stage and completely make a fool of myself. They're just things that I feel like unless you're in the moment and in your head, people on the outside aren't really going to understand it. And unless people are educated on what anxiety actually is, I don't think people are going to ever be fully accepting. I think we're in an age where mental health awareness has been made huge leaps. And I'm very grateful for that because growing up and having different struggles with mental health, I think that it's nice to know that other people are trying to be more understanding and educated on what it is and how tolling and stressful it can be on not just your mind, but your physical body. And just think that if you're dealing with anxiety, know that you're not alone. Try to get help. like, I'm not here to be a real licensed therapist. I'm just here to have my experiences and give you guys advice like a sister or a best friend. I definitely encourage you to go talk to someone professional, and find healthy coping mechanisms. Therapy doesn't have to be forever, but it definitely gives you the tools to shift your mindset, like we talked about in the episode on sustainable growth. If you haven't listened to that episode, I highly encourage it, because I talked a lot about the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and I think that anxiety really fits into that category of feeling stuck and in a fixed way of living, and then the growth, which is kind of going out of your comfort zone and finding new things that you can accomplish that maybe you thought you weren't capable of. But healthy coping mechanisms are huge. I just want you to know that you're loved, you're not alone, and anxiety is very normalized in our society now, I feel like, and there's two sides to that. I think that a lot of people are just more aware of it, so they're very accepting and open about talking about their struggles with mental health and anxiety. And then I think other people kind of use it to their advantage and maybe don't even have serious anxiety, but they just say that they do. And I kind of want to go into a part 2 of that, because I just think that some people really do manipulate the system when it comes to mental health, and I think that's really unfair for people who are genuinely struggling. Another parter about that, but this was part 1 of living with anxiety. I made it up to 14 years old, and now I'm almost 22, so we've still got a ways to go with my anxious story. And high school was definitely a pivotal time in my life that a lot of things went down and things get really serious. So part 2 will probably have some sort of trigger warning. But yeah, I just think that this needs a second part, because living with anxiety is living, it's lifelong. There's a gazillion stories I could tell. I'm sure that there's a lot more that I skipped over or kind of just completely forgot about because of trauma, but those are kind of some of the main ones that I remember experiencing from a very young age. And yeah, I think that's where I'll stop for today. I literally have notes here, and we're only here. We're only halfway through the page, and we've got a lot more to go. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Flourish Factor. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to be notified about future episodes on YouTube. And make sure to give this video a rating on Spotify, and make sure to follow my podcast. You can keep up to date with all of the future episodes and segments from the Flourish Factor. Again, this is Kennedy, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, friends.